The courtroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. A young black teen stood at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was nervous, but she stood tall. Everyone in the room could see that she didn't have a lawyer. It was just her, a small folder in her hand and the courage that pushed her to come this far. The judge, a middle-aged man with gray hair and glasses, looked down at her file with mild annoyance. He had seen hundreds of cases like this before, or so he thought. "You filed this yourself?" the judge asked, his tone flat. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied softly but clearly. "I believe I was denied payment for my work, and I'd like the court to review it." The judge sighed and leaned back in his chair. He looked around the courtroom, and a few people sitting on the benches chuckled quietly. To them, this was another kid trying to play lawyer. The judge shook his head. "This isn't a place for school projects," he said. "You can't just file a case because you think something isn't fair. Do you even understand how this process works?" The girl's fingers tightened around her folder. She swallowed hard but didn't step back. "Yes, Your Honor," she said.
"I understand the process.
I followed the law under the State Labor Code Section 352, which protects minors from unpaid labor." The judge froze for a moment, surprised that she even knew what that was. He looked down again at the papers she had filed. Her handwriting was neat, her statements clear, but still his pride got in the way. "That may be so," he said, waving his hand. "But this isn't something you can handle on your own. You need proper legal representation." Case dismissed. The gavel hit the desk. The sound echoed through the room. The girl's eyes blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. The people in the back whispered and shook their heads, and someone muttered, "Told you she wouldn't last 2 minutes." She gathered her papers, her heart pounding. It felt like her chest was closing in, but she kept her chin up. As she turned to leave, she said softly, "With all due respect, Your Honor, the law doesn't say I need a lawyer to be heard." Then she walked out of the courtroom, her footsteps quiet but full of strength. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright, almost too bright. She sat down on the steps, opening her folder again. Every paper she had prepared, every citation she had written, all of it felt useless now. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. She knew she was right. Her name was Lena, 17 years old. She had spent her summer working at a small local law firm, hoping to save money for college. The job was supposed to pay weekly, but when the summer ended, the firm told her she had been volunteering. They said they didn't owe her a cent. Lena had felt humiliated, but instead of arguing, she went home and opened her laptop. She read everything she could find about labor rights for minors. She spent nights copying laws word by word, highlighting every section that could apply to her situation. By the time she filed her case, she knew exactly which forms to use and how to fill them out. She wasn't angry that she lost that day. She was angry that she wasn't even heard. Back at home, her mother was in the kitchen folding laundry when Lena walked in. "How did it go, baby?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Lena tried to smile. He didn't listen. "He said I need a lawyer." Her mother frowned, putting down the clothes. "Did you tell him what you studied?" "I did." "He didn't care." Her mother sighed and walked over to her. "Listen, you did your best. Sometimes people won't see what you're capable of until you make them look again." Lena nodded. She didn't say anything else, but she knew she wasn't done. Not yet. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She kept hearing the sound of the gavel hitting the desk, the sound that dismissed all her effort in a single second. She opened her laptop again, pulling up legal databases and court procedures. She read about motions, appeals, and dismissals. The more she read, the more confident she became that what the judge did wasn't final. She found a section that said cases dismissed without prejudice could be refiled. She smiled faintly. That was her way back in. The next morning, while most teens her age were scrolling through their phones or planning their weekend, Lena was at the library when it opened. She asked the librarian for help finding legal resources and spent hours taking notes. She didn't tell anyone, not even her mother. She wanted her next move to speak for itself. In another part of town, the judge sat in his office going through his afternoon paperwork. He barely remembered the girl from earlier. To him, it was just another small claim. But as he flipped through the stack, he came across her file again. The handwriting caught his eye, and something about it made him stop. He read the first paragraph of her statement, and his brow furrowed. It was written clearly without mistakes, with proper references to actual laws. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. Maybe she did know what she was talking about, he muttered under his breath. But then he shook his head. "No, she's just a kid. Probably copied it from the internet. Still, a small doubt lingered in his mind. Meanwhile, Lena spent the next few days rewriting her case. She added more evidence this time. Emails, text messages, even a photo of her timesheet. Each detail was organized perfectly. When she was finally done, she looked over it again and whispered to herself, "This time, he'll have to listen." She walked back to the courthouse the next week. The clerk behind the counter recognized her.
Didn't you already file this?
He asked. "Yes," Lena said calmly. But the dismissal wasn't with prejudice. "I have the right to refile." The clerk blinked, surprised, but nodded and took the papers. Lena left the courthouse quietly, but her heart raced with hope. She didn't need anyone to speak for her. She just needed a fair chance. Back at home, her mother smiled when Lena told her what she had done. "That's my girl," she said softly. "You don't let anyone silence you," Lena smiled back. "I just want what's right." Days passed and life went on as usual. Lena went back to school, studied, and worked part-time at a cafe in the evenings. But every time she walked past the courthouse, she felt something inside her stir, a mix of frustration and determination. She knew she wasn't finished with that judge. She wasn't done proving that she knew exactly what she was doing. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. The envelope was official, stamped with the county seal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a notice her case had been reopened for review. The judge had seen her refiling and decided to schedule a new hearing. Lena gasped softly. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. It was relief. It was hope. That night, she placed the letter beside her bed and stared at it before turning off the light. She whispered to herself, "Next time he'll see me for who I really am." Somewhere across town, the judge sat in his office again, staring at the same case file. He didn't know why he had decided to reopen it. Maybe it was curiosity or maybe it was guilt, but something about that girl's confidence stayed with him. He remembered the way she stood there, not scared, not loud, just sure of herself. It had been a long time since he saw someone in his courtroom with that kind of quiet courage. For the first time in years, he felt he might have been wrong about someone. The case was on the schedule again. The courtroom would see her once more. Only this time things wouldn't go the way they did before. The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains in Lena's room, painting soft lines across her desk piled with books and papers. She had been awake for hours, reading old cases online and scribbling notes in the margins of a worn notebook. Today was the day she would go back to court, and even though her stomach twisted with nerves, her heart felt steady. This time, she wasn't walking in as someone hoping to be heard. She was walking in knowing she deserved to be. Her mother knocked lightly on the door. "You ready, sweetheart?" she asked. Lena nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I think I am." Her mother smiled and handed her a small folded note. "Your grandmother used to write this before every big moment in her life," she said. Lena unfolded the paper. It read, "Speak the truth even if your voice shakes." Lena tucked the note into her pocket and whispered, "Thank you." When they arrived at the courthouse, the air felt different. The same marble floors, the same tall windows, but today she noticed things she hadn't before. The soft hum of people talking, the shuffle of papers, the smell of coffee in someone's cup. It all felt alive, like a place where stories were written and rewritten every day. As she waited in the hallway, she could see the courtroom door slightly open. The same judge was inside, talking with his clerk. He hadn't seen her yet. She sat down on the bench and opened her folder one last time. Every paper was in order, labeled neatly. She went over her main points silently, her lips moving as she rehearsed. When the clerk finally called her name, she stood up and walked inside, her steps slow but steady. The judge looked up. His eyes flickered with recognition. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice less sharp than before, "I see you've refiled your case." "Yes, Your Honor," Lena said politely. "The previous dismissal was without prejudice, which means I have the right to refile. I've included additional evidence for review." The judge adjusted his glasses, almost hiding a small smile. "I see you've done your homework." A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly, not mockingly this time, but with curiosity. The judge leaned forward. Very well. Let's begin. Lena took a deep breath and began to speak. She explained how she had worked at the firm during the summer, handling clerical tasks and organizing files. She showed her timesheets and emails confirming her schedule. Then she pointed out the law. Every section she quoted, every rule she mentioned, she explained in simple terms so everyone could follow. At first, the opposing attorney looked amused, but as Lena continued, his expression changed. Her argument wasn't emotional. It was factual, clear, and confident. The judge listened quietly, occasionally nodding. The courtroom was silent except for Lena's calm voice and the sound of papers turning. When she finished, the judge asked, "And how did you come to know all of this?" Lena hesitated, then said honestly, "My mom and I went through something similar when I was younger. She almost lost her job because her employer didn't follow the rules. I started reading about labor laws to help her. I guess I just never stopped learning." The judge's face softened. "I see." The opposing attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this young lady may know the words, but she lacks proper legal training. We can't take her interpretations at face value." Lena didn't flinch. "That's why I included copies of official state guidelines and previous case rulings that support my claim," she said, sliding a document forward. The judge took it and began to read. The attorney looked speechless. A few minutes passed in silence as the judge reviewed her evidence. Finally, he looked up. "This is thorough," he said slowly. "More thorough than some cases I've received from licensed attorneys." Lena didn't smile. She just nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." After the session, the judge announced he would review everything and schedule the final ruling for next week. As Lena gathered her things, the clerk whispered, "You did really well in there." Lena smiled faintly. "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, her mother wrapped her in a hug. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "You stood there like you belonged." Lena smiled for real this time. "Because I do." That evening, the story spread through town faster than she expected. Someone who had been in the courtroom posted about it online, calling her the teen who outsmarted the system. At first, Lena felt embarrassed, but as messages started coming in from people saying she inspired them, she began to realize something. This wasn't just about her anymore. In another part of town, the judge sat in his quiet office long after everyone had gone home. He still had Lena's file on his desk. He opened it again and read her statement carefully. It was written with precision and empathy, not arrogance. She wasn't trying to prove she was better. She was just trying to prove she was right. He thought about the first time he dismissed her. He had assumed she was just another teen who didn't understand the law. Now he wasn't so sure who had misunderstood whom. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt humbled by someone standing on the other side of his desk. He made a note in the file to personally review every detail before the next hearing. He wanted to be certain that if he made a ruling, it would be fair, not based on assumptions. Back at home, Lena sat at her desk staring at her reflection in the dark window. She was exhausted, but she felt something new, a quiet pride. Her mother peeked in. "You should rest," she said gently. "I will," Lena replied. I can't stop thinking about how many people don't get the chance to be heard because they're too afraid to try." Her mother walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's why what you're doing matters." Lena looked up. "Do you really think it makes a difference?" "Of course," her mother said. "You didn't just speak for yourself today. You spoke for everyone who thought they didn't have a voice." Lena smiled quietly. "Then I'm not stopping now." The next few days moved slowly. School felt different now. Teachers who had heard about her case congratulated her. Some classmates asked how she knew so much about the law. She didn't brag. She just said, "I read a lot." But deep down she felt something shift. For the first time, people looked at her with respect instead of doubt. At the cafe where she worked after school, her coworker handed her a newspaper clipping. "Hey, you made it in the local section," he said with a grin. Lena looked down. There was a small article titled, "Teen Challenges Labor Case Alone." and wins respect in court. She laughed softly, shaking her head. They make it sound like I'm some kind of hero. Her coworker smiled. Maybe you are. That night, Lena stayed up late again, but this time not to study. She opened a blank notebook and started writing everything she'd learned, the process, the steps, the things she wished someone had told her sooner. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet, but it felt right to put it down. Maybe one day someone else like her would need it. A week later, the final hearing was scheduled. The judge entered the courtroom with a different air about him. He greeted Lena with a nod that felt genuine. As the session began, he reviewed the facts aloud, addressing both sides fairly. The opposing attorney tried again to undermine Lena's points, but each time she calmly responded with evidence and reasoning. When the hearing ended, the judge said he would issue his final decision soon. As Lena walked out, she caught a glimpse of his expression. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was respect. Outside, the sky was golden with sunset. Lena stood on the courthouse steps, feeling the cool breeze on her face. Her mother joined her, smiling. "No matter what happens, you've already won," she said. Lena nodded slowly. "I think so too." Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was bigger than one case. It was about standing up when no one believes you, about fighting quietly but fearlessly. And even though she was only 17, she had already learned something many adults still struggled to understand. Justice doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who refuse to give up. As the courthouse doors closed behind her, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'm just getting started." The courthouse buzzed with quiet whispers that morning. Everyone had heard about the young girl who had faced a judge alone and made him reopen her case. Even some of the older clerks couldn't stop talking about her courage. Lena sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, her hands folded on her lap. She wasn't nervous this time. She was calm, focused, and ready to finish what she started. Her mother sat beside her, holding her bag. "You sure you're okay?" she asked softly. Lena nodded. "I've gone over everything again. I'm ready." When the doors opened, Lena stood up. The same judge who had once dismissed her without a second thought looked different today. His tone was gentler, his eyes thoughtful. "Miss Williams," he said as she stepped forward. "Thank you for returning. Let's continue where we left off." She nodded, placing her folder on the table. The room filled with quiet anticipation. There were a few reporters now, some curious onlookers, even a few students who had come to see her speak. Lena took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every eye on her, and began. She started by reviewing her claim again, explaining clearly how she had worked full hours and completed tasks beyond what a volunteer would do. She spoke of the promises made to her by the firm's manager, and how at the end of summer she had been told her time didn't count as real work. She showed records of messages, emails, and timesheets. Each piece of evidence was placed in front of the judge with quiet confidence. The opposing attorney tried to interrupt her once or twice, but Lena didn't stumble. She listened politely, waited for her turn, and responded with facts. Her calmness filled the room. People were no longer whispering, they were listening. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Miss Williams, you've done an impressive job preparing your case. But tell me, what made you decide to do all this yourself instead of seeking help from a lawyer or a teacher?" Lena looked at him for a moment. "Because I didn't want someone else to speak for me. If I let someone else take over, they might not feel what I felt. They might not fight as hard. I wanted the truth to come straight from me." The judge nodded slowly. "That's a rare kind of courage," the attorney smirked. "Or foolishness," he said quietly. Lena turned toward him. "It's not foolish to know your rights," she replied simply. Her voice was calm but strong enough to echo across the room. The attorney went silent. As the hours passed, the case moved through every detail. The judge asked questions and Lena answered each one clearly. Her words weren't complicated, but they carried meaning. The courtroom had grown warm from the sunlight pouring through the windows, but no one wanted to move. Everyone was too absorbed in the sight of a teenager standing up for herself with such composure. Finally, the judge looked up from his notes. "I'll need to review all this again before I make my final ruling," he said. "But I'll say this now. You've presented yourself with intelligence and grace. You've reminded us that justice is not just for those with experience, but for anyone willing to learn." Lena smiled faintly. "Thank you, Your Honor." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Court is adjourned for today." As the gavel came down, the sound didn't sting this time. It felt like a promise. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool and fresh. People approached Lena, some asking questions, others just offering quiet words of encouragement. A woman who worked as a paralegal at a nearby firm came up and said, "You spoke like someone who's already been doing this for years. Don't stop here." Lena smiled, shy but proud. "I don't think I will." When she and her mother reached home, they were both too tired to talk much. Lena went straight to her room, placing her folder on her desk. The late afternoon light made the papers glow softly. She sat there thinking about everything that had happened. It felt unreal but also right. She had done something no one expected her to do. That night, she couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop and started researching again. Not for her case, but for something bigger. She wanted to know how to help others who were being treated unfairly. She found forums where people shared their experiences about workplace injustice, and she began writing replies, giving them advice based on what she had learned. Hours passed before she realized it was almost dawn. Her mother walked into her room half asleep. "You're still up?" she asked. Lena smiled, rubbing her tired eyes. "Yeah, I was just helping someone online. They're going through something like I did." Her mother leaned against the doorframe. "You really don't know when to stop, do you?" Lena laughed softly. "Not when it comes to what's right." A few days later, the judge sat in his office again, reading through Lena's file for the third time. He couldn't shake the feeling that this case had changed him somehow. For years, he had followed the same pattern, trusting experience over youth, words over heart. But Lena had shown him that the law wasn't just about who spoke louder or wore a suit. It was about truth, and sometimes truth came from the least expected places. He looked over her citations again, every one of them accurate. Her arguments were based on real cases, and she had followed procedure perfectly. He even called a legal assistant to double-check her work. The assistant returned, impressed. "She's spot on," he said. "Every detail matches." The judge leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "She's going to make a fine lawyer one day," he said quietly. The assistant smiled. "She's already halfway there." The day before the final ruling, Lena walked past the old law firm where she had worked. She looked through the window. The same manager who had once told her she was lucky to get experience sat behind his desk, unaware that the girl he underestimated had taken him to court and made the whole town notice. Lena didn't feel angry anymore. She just felt proud that she had chosen to fight with knowledge, not bitterness. She walked away, her steps light, her heart peaceful. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. People from the community, students, reporters, they all came to see how it would end. Lena sat quietly beside her mother, waiting. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. He began reading from his notes. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, it is clear that Miss Williams performed legitimate work that qualifies as paid labor under state law. Therefore, her claim is valid. Lena's heart stopped for a second. She looked up, hardly daring to breathe. The court orders the defendant to pay the full wages owed, including additional compensation for withheld payment. The judge continued. He paused and then looked directly at her. "And I'd like to add this, Miss Williams. You've reminded us all that justice doesn't always come from those with titles. Sometimes it starts with someone who simply refuses to stay quiet." The sound of applause filled the courtroom before anyone could stop it. The judge smiled, shaking his head slightly but not silencing the room. Lena felt her eyes well up. Her mother held her hand tightly, whispering, "You did it." After the session, the judge approached Lena privately. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first saw you, I thought you were just another kid trying something impossible. I was wrong. You taught me something valuable." Lena smiled humbly. "Thank you, Your Honor," he nodded. "Promise me one thing. Don't stop learning. We need more people like you," she promised. When she walked out of the courthouse that day, the sunlight felt warmer than ever. Reporters tried to ask her questions, but she didn't say much. She just smiled and said, "I'm happy the truth spoke for itself." That night, back at home, Lena sat at her desk again. The note from her grandmother was still there. "Speak the truth even if your voice shakes." She picked it up and placed it in her notebook. Then she opened her laptop and started searching for pre-law programs she could apply to. The future felt open, full of possibility. In another corner of town, the judge closed his office for the evening. As he walked out, he stopped by the empty courtroom. He looked at the seat where Lena had stood and smiled softly. For the first time in years, he felt that justice had truly been served. And for Lena, it was just the beginning of a life that would continue to prove one thing: knowledge, courage, and truth can change even the strongest walls of doubt. The next morning, Lena woke up before sunrise. The world outside was quiet, but her heart was restless. She knew today would be different. For the first time since the whole court mess began, she didn't feel nervous. She felt ready. She packed her folder neatly, checking the pages again and again, making sure every piece of paper was in the right place. Her mother watched her from the doorway with a soft smile. "You've got this," she whispered. Lena nodded, taking a deep breath. By the time they reached the courthouse, the place was busier than before. People were already gathered outside, some holding small signs that read things like "Fair Justice for All" and "Let Her Speak." Lena felt her chest tighten. She didn't expect this kind of attention. She just wanted to be heard, not to become some symbol. But now, as the cameras pointed her way, she realized this story wasn't just hers anymore. It was about everyone who had been silenced before being heard. Inside, Judge Reynolds sat tall on the bench, his expression calm but thoughtful. The courtroom felt heavier this time, not tense but serious. When Lena entered, all eyes turned to her. The reporters whispered, their pens already moving. She walked steadily to the table, her hands firm on her folder. The judge gave a slow nod. "Miss Williams, welcome back," he said. His voice was softer than before, carrying a tone of respect. "Are you ready to proceed?" Lena nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The opposing lawyer stood too, looking less confident than he had been the first time. He shuffled his papers, cleared his throat, and gave her a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We can begin," he said. Judge Reynolds gestured for Lena to start. She rose slowly, her palms slightly trembling, but her voice steady. "Your Honor," she began, "this case isn't about revenge or money. It's about fairness." The courtroom grew silent. Even the sound of pens stopped. Lena explained how she worked long hours without being paid what she earned, how her employer dismissed her as a volunteer when she clearly had a signed agreement. She spoke clearly, using simple words but with undeniable strength. Then she picked up a paper and read from it, the labor law she had quoted during her first hearing. Her voice didn't shake once. The judge listened closely, leaning slightly forward. When she finished, she looked up and said, "The law protects workers no matter their age. I did my part. I just need the law to do its part." Her mother watched from the back row, tears welling up in her eyes. The room was so quiet that even the sound of breathing seemed loud. Then it was the opposing lawyer's turn. He spoke with confidence at first, but as he went through his notes, his tone softened. He couldn't argue with her evidence. Her documents were clear. Every time he tried to twist a detail, Lena responded calmly, quoting another line from the labor code or pointing to a document she had prepared. Her quiet confidence unsettled him. Halfway through, Judge Reynolds interrupted. "Mr. Clark," he said firmly, "I've heard enough on this point. Miss Williams, your research is impressive. I see you've taken time to understand the law very well." Lena nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." The audience murmured in approval. Even some of the court staff exchanged small smiles. The judge's tone carried warmth this time, and Lena could sense he meant it. When both sides had presented everything, Judge Reynolds took a deep breath and looked over his notes. He removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and sat quietly for a few moments. The silence stretched on until finally he spoke. "This court finds in favor of Miss Williams," he said clearly. "The evidence and documentation show that her claim is valid and legally sound. The employer is ordered to compensate her for unpaid wages, including damages as allowed by law." Gasps filled the room. A few people clapped softly until the judge raised his hand for order. Lena stood frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. Her mother clasped her hands together, whispering a quiet prayer of thanks. Judge Reynolds looked directly at Lena and said, "You have shown extraordinary understanding and composure, young lady. I owe you an apology for dismissing your case earlier." "That was wrong of me." Lena's eyes softened. She didn't smile right away. She just nodded and said, "Thank you, Your Honor, I appreciate that." Reporters were already scribbling, whispering to each other. One of them leaned over to another and said, "This story is going everywhere." But Lena wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about her mother waiting at the back of the room, and about the long nights she had spent reading and learning, wondering if it would ever pay off. Now it finally did. After the hearing, Judge Reynolds asked Lena to stay behind for a moment. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving only a few staff members. The judge stepped down from the bench and stood near her table. He seemed older now, but also more human. "You reminded me why I became a judge," he said quietly. "Sometimes we get lost in routine. We forget what justice really means." "You made me remember." Lena smiled gently. "I just wanted to be treated fairly," she said. He nodded. "And you were right to fight for it." He extended his hand and she shook it respectfully. As she and her mother walked out of the courthouse, the crowd outside started cheering. Cameras flashed, voices called her name, and microphones were pushed toward her. But she didn't stop for interviews. She just kept walking, holding her mother's hand tightly. "You did it," her mother whispered. "We did it," Lena replied softly. On the courthouse steps, she looked up at the big stone building that had once felt like a wall she could never climb. Now it looked different. It didn't scare her anymore. It felt like a place that could change, if people kept pushing for what was right. Later that evening, she sat at home, exhausted but at peace. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages from friends, teachers, and strangers who said they were inspired by her courage. One message stood out. It was from a law student who wrote, "You reminded me why I'm studying law. Thank you." Lena read it twice, smiling to herself. She didn't do it for fame or praise. She just wanted justice. But if her small fight helped others believe they could do the same, then it was worth everything. Her mother brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her on the couch. "You know, the world needs more people like you," she said softly. Lena looked down at the cup, the steam rising gently. "Maybe," she said. "But maybe the world just needs more people who believe in doing the right thing." They sat quietly for a while, the warmth of the tea and the quiet hum of the evening surrounding them. Outside, the city lights flickered like stars, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt at peace, not because she had won a case, but because she had stood up for herself and what was right. She knew this was only the beginning of her story.